Many of the witnesses that we've had before our committee and many leading business organisations, including the Institute of Directors recently, spoken of the need for a transition period, and the Mayor of London did so yesterday in order to provide businesses with certainty at an early stage. But the government hasn't really agreed to this, have they? Because what they mean by that is a time-limited period after we leave, in case there isn't a deal in place. But what the government has talked about is implementation or a phased-in approach. Can you confirm that those two things are different?
Well, when I was here last, we talked about this at very great length, and I made the point that we needed to distinguish between what the range of views of what a transition arrangement means, and which is why we used implementation period as a better phrase. The range of views, just to remind you, range from the views taken by some members of the Commission, which is, well, we'll do the, quotes, the divorce, the departure deal, and then after that we'll have a transition arrangement while you're still in paying money, still with free movement of peoples, all of these things going on, and we'll do the deal in the sort of the long-term deal in slow motion. That is plainly not what we're after. So that's the first thing to say. The other people are vague about transition arrangements. I think the most, because I wasn't here for your discussions with the IOD, so I don't know precisely what they said to you. But let me give you one example of it. One example is many banking structures, many of the financial services structures, want to have time from the point at which they know what the outcome is to the point at which they take effect. They do their planning on facts, not fears. And I understand that, but we are talking about something which is a negotiation, and the negotiations has not yet started. But what we do have, I think, around Europe, amongst member states, is an understanding that we're going to need some time to put into effect whatever it is that we agree afterwards. And last time I resisted being drawn on what that transition, or I don't like transition arrangements, but what that implementation phase would be, for a very simple reason. What the implementation phase needs to be is dependent upon what the final outcome is, what the end structure is. If it's very similar to now, so arguably a comprehensive free trade agreement would be quite similar to the effect in terms of access single market, then there's less transition required. If it's a big difference, more transition is required. But as I say, we've started the negotiation, and I really would rather not try to initiate the negotiation through this committee.
But it's still the case at the start of the negotiations, as far as we're aware, that neither the EU27 or the Commission, Michel Barnier, has agreed that these negotiations will take place in parallel. Is that the case? That's
the case at the moment. That's right.
So there is still a risk that even though the government wants to conclude both Article 50 and a free trade agreement within 2 years and all the other things like Justice and Home Affairs, there is still a risk that our future relationship negotiation will endure longer than the 2 years past March 2019. There's still a risk of that, isn't there?
Well, I didn't write the Article 50 guidelines, but they say, in effect, at the end of 2 years, you're not a member of the European Union anymore, unless you've negotiated something different. So there's a fixed timeline on that. In the British interest, the British national interest, not the British government interest, it is sensible to achieve the decisions by the end of the 2 year period, from negotiating points of view, but also from sort of intelligent management point of view. That's what we intend. Now, you're right. The first conversation between Michel and me, the first formal conversation between Michel and myself, will almost certainly be about this subject.
Okay, but there's still a risk that this could take longer than 2 years, because no other country around the world has managed to agree a free trade agreement with the EU.
Well, it's very interesting that, because, I mean, let me say this. Karel de Gucht, who used to be the Trade Commissioner and who is not a fan of Brexit, who's a critic of Brexit, said in terms, this could take a long time, but it doesn't need to. It's not a technical constraint, it's a question of political will. Why did he say that? Because this is not like the CETA agreement and so on. We start from the position where we are at identical product standards, identical regulatory standards and so on. And as you know, from the last time I appeared here, the Great Repeal Bill will ensure that we are at that stage the moment we leave.
Day one, that's fine, but regulatory divergence will kick in. I mean, you
yes, of
campaign
course,
to leave the EU and you campaign to take back control of regulation.
But there's a big difference.
Regulation can differ in 50 days.
Yeah, with respect, Mr. Reynolds, there is a big difference between doing what you need to do to keep regulations aside, and that's a much more complex issue than I think people realise, because not all of our regulatory identity is dependent on European Union organisations. Sometimes it's based on European organisations that are not members of the Union. That's the first thing. Second thing is, when two countries come together to arrange trading arrangements between themselves, the first stage is to go to understand each other's structures and standards. So that takes time too. None of that do we have to do. Neither do we have to have an entry into force period, which is the other issue that takes time in these things, because it's not just the sign-off, it's the actual period of industry coming to meet the new standards. So that's the first thing. The second thing is this. This has been reflected back to me in my discussions with other member states, but also to others of my colleagues, that they want to see a constructive outcome, which we interpret to be a deal. And the reason they want to see a constructive outcome is because they have trading arrangements with us already. There is a strong vested interest on both sides of this negotiation to actually get an outcome. That is not the position you have when you're starting a free trade deal from nowhere. This deal is unique, and the approach we've taken to it is unique too. The reason we've taken, well, not the only reason, but one of the reasons we've taken an overarching free trade agreement approach to this, comprehensive free trade agreement, is because it's simpler to do than the way they normally do free trade agreements. If you go and look at the history of the Canadian CETA deal, there's sector by sector by sector by sector analysis and sector by sector negotiations. Each of those takes time. We're trying to get around that.
On the substance rather than the timing,
No.
It is the case that we are seeking, and the government is seeking, a deal that is more ambitious than CETA. I'm hoping, because the CETA agreement...
I think that's right. I think
yes,
that's fair.
That's
I
right.
think that's fair.
And the decision-making procedure which governs CETA is due to a mixed agreement and therefore requires unanimity in the Council and ratification of 37 rather than 38 national parliaments and regional parliaments of the EU 27. Such a procedure is likely to apply to our free trade agreement, is it not, if it is going to be more ambitious and more comprehensive than CETA?
The mixed, well, this is a matter that changes as we go, because there's a Singapore case that's happened on this, and that may well be the case. We simply don't know at this stage. It will depend on the structure of the negotiations. Another one of the early things I need to talk to Michelle about is how we structure this. I mean, if we structure it as one big package deal, then I suspect we'll have to go through a mixed agreement. Okay. But if it's structured as separate deals, some of them may not. We don't know.
So we might need ratification of those parliaments.
Sorry?
We may well need ratification of all of those
May,
parliaments.
but again, I reiterate the point I made at the beginning, or sort of the last round of answers to this. Bear in mind that every country we deal with will have an interest. You know, they have an established interest, not the interest you have with CETA, where it's future business. Future business is never as attractive as defending your current business.
Okay.
Thank you.